interesting talk, especially if you're for people like me. Okay, so Ganesh. Thank you.
Thanks, Claude. All right, so good evening. I will be talking today about something which I believe is of interest to all of us, which is food. In this talk, the idea would be introduced to you food as an entity which beyond experiential level, can we look at it from the data level? Can we look at the data associated with food? Can we quantify information related to food to ask some interesting questions? Two of the questions which are already proposed in the summary, that why do we combine in our recipes ingredients the way we do? Is there any pattern behind it? And this is where I'll be talking about some of the research that we have done recently and come up with some interesting observations. And towards the end of it, I'll actually propose certain applications that are coming out of our own research, as well as in general research that is happening with the premise of data-based analysis, data-driven analysis of food. And that is where I'll be talking about a very interesting aspect. That is where the second question comes into the picture, which is that can we modify, alter our diet in a manner such that it can promote health, right? That's what I'll be doing. So, food is an interesting thing, and it has helped us over a long period of time in the evolutionary history to be fit, to manage the civilization, and in fact it has been suggested that our big brains have been partly the growth of the brain that has happened in the few million years recently, which is what is responsible for a lot of technology as well as culture and literature that we see around us probably has been promoted by the fact that we have ready availability of cooked food. So the process of cooking that we have ended up discovering over at some point of time probably has helped a lot in for us to increase the brain size and many other things that I told you. But beyond that, what has happened is that while in the process of becoming what we are today, Homo sapiens, we have ended up getting certain side effects of food or the diet. And they are seen in terms of what are called as lifestyle disorders. Lifestyle disorders and complex diseases such as obesity, diabetes, and some other forms of cancer and cardiovascular diseases, right? So the question therefore is, beyond going the fads of what should be eaten, what should not be eaten, could it be possible for us to use computation and data analytics such that we can actually come up with empirical, experience-based ways of predicting or suggesting personalized dietary recommendation? This is where I'll be talking about work done by some other researchers towards the end of it. Right. So how did we land up being here? How does a person end up becoming obese? Right? If that you ask that question, what are the possible answers that you get? That why did I become obese? If you were to ask that question, anyone. So what is the kind of answers that you might end up getting? Right? Well, these are the possible answers. You might blame it on the genes. Right? Well, it's not my fault. Or you can blame it on the friends. While it seems rather not so commonsensical, but in fact it has been shown through Framingham data analysis that indeed the social networks that you have could be partially responsible for your increase in obesity or the BMI. And that's a very interesting study published in British Medical Journal. But beyond that, we know that more realistically, physical activity and most importantly, diet are the critical contributors towards diseases such as obesity and connected disorders such as diabetes, right? Given that, when we say diet, what are we talking about here? So I guess many of you are sitting here are consuming this diet on a regular basis, right? And this is what I'm referring to, that is the traditional recipes. When you ask, what do I eat as part of my diet, right? Turns out that whether you are in your mess or not otherwise, you end up eating these recipes which have been traditionally passed to you, true for everybody. Regardless of what we are, we tend to get biased, logged into the kind of food that we eat, which are being passed on to us, right? So that's where the question starts. That is the point where we started asking this question about why do we eat what we eat, the kind of recipes that we eat, right? So the question is transformed into the fact that traditional recipes, and notice that similar to regional languages, different cultures across the world have actually evolved various regional variations in the way the ingredients are mixed together. beyond the process of cooking, we have developed our own idiosyncrasies as a society to end up having recipes. So can we actually look into these recipes to find out, are there any patterns in it? That was the question that we were asking, and I'll tell you the premise for that also again. So we asked this question, why do we combine ingredients in our traditional recipes, some of them which you saw just now in your, in your own triple IT Delhi mess menu, why do we combine them the way we do? Now, that for answering this question, we looked at cuisines, world cuisines, and specifically within that, the Indian cuisine and the traditional recipes that are passed on to us, which are documented. And whenever I am saying traditional recipes or Indian cuisine, I am referring to recipes which are presently available and have been surviving at least for last few generations or maybe a century. That's what I am referring to, right? So we are asking this question from a data and hypothesis point of view about, let us look at this and try to find out are there any patterns in it. Further, I'll show you that how we ended up finding out what we think is the molecular essence of the Indian cuisine, and it's very quintessential and different from those of Western cuisines. I'll talk about that. And finally, I'll talk about various applications that are possible knowing such a pattern. So knowing a law or a rule, can it allow us to come up with interesting applications or not? That's what I'll be touching upon, and this is where I'll tell you about even personalized dietary recommendations part. Okay, so the premise is looking at food from the data perspective, and for this we looked at we had to find out where is data available. As I told you, the way we have been eating food, turns out that people who eat Indian food, this is in the context of the Indian recipes, if you consider that as an experiment, then approximately 1 billion experiments are conducted every day, given the fact that we end up eating the kind of recipes that we do, which are cooked according to the traditional Indian recipes. And the validation of this data has been happening over centuries, may I say, in terms of they being well tested as well as well tested. Notice that these recipes would not have survived had they been not palatable and accepted by the cultures over the period of time. Right? So that is the logged in data in terms of traditional recipes that we are looking at. How do we get our hands on it? So this is where, with the help of a couple of students, an MTech student as well as a PhD student, we scraped the data from various databases, and this was coming from Tarla Dalal, okay, and others, Sanjeev Kapoor and NDTV, all recipes, etc. We scraped the data of recipe, the names, the kind of ingredients that are going into it with a certain purpose. To test a certain hypothesis. I'll come to that. This data had 2,543 recipes composed of around 194 unique ingredients belonging to different regional cuisines, and these ingredients were further classified into various categories: spices, pulses, meat, herb, flour, etc. Right? And well, we were looking at recipes and how ingredients belonging to different categories are put into these recipes and how did they end up being there. So, to ask the same question again, I will say that starting from a very simple cuisine having 4 ingredients, the way they are combined to create recipes in a simplistic cuisine which is shown here, having only 3 ingredients each, turns out that you can have all possible combinations in which you can actually combine these ingredients. To set a premise, these ingredients belonging to different flavors and categories, they could be combined in a manner that they are very uniform, of similar type, right? Or they could be very diverse. That is just to set a premise, right? Now let's see what happens in the case of Indian cuisine. Well, this is where we started looking at this question in a more quantified manner. We said that what are the available ideas about how ingredients are used together. So this idea of food pairing hypothesis was given by a chef, Blumenthal, with his intuition from cooking and that training that he has had. Said that ingredients that share flavor compounds, they are similar to each other in their taste, tend to be used together in recipes, right? So more the sharing in terms of their taste being similar, the more they are used together in the recipes. That was the proposal that was given by Blumenthal. So this is illustration of the same. Assume that these are the 2 ingredients that we are looking at. If this particular set represents a set of molecules which are present, flavor molecules that are present in this ingredient, and this being belonging to other ingredient, then the intersection is the factor which specifies whether these two ingredients will be used. What is the chances of these two being used together? That was the proposal that was made. And in fact, for the first time, by investigating a lot of world cuisines, North American, Latin American, Southern and Eastern European cuisines, it was shown that indeed the positive food pairing hypothesis is actually true. That you do have such a pattern present in the world cuisines. That raised a question, and a very interesting question. Wow, that seems like a generic law which is being followed by the world cuisines across, right? So could that be a universal law that is applicable to all cuisines? And that's where, while teaching a course on complex networks, I posed this question and started investigating and getting this matter in the case of Indian cuisine. Okay, so this is the observation done from the Western cuisines that compared. So what are we comparing it with when you're talking about similarity? When you take a certain cuisine, it would have unique ingredients which are used in that cuisine, as well as recipes which are traditionally cooked in that particular culture. What we do is that if you were to take the same ingredient, having whatever molecules they have, and if you were to randomize all these ingredients to create the same number of recipes present in the traditional cuisine with same size distribution without even affecting that, what would be the amount of food pairing? What would be the average food pairing? Which I will tell you how to quantify very soon. If you were to do that, you will get a number which is a baseline, indicating that this would be the food pairing in any case. Notice that to go from here to here, the various factors that are responsible for this are geography, culture, climate, and various historical accidents, because of which the kind of combinations that are made in the recipes are being made, right? So this dictates some kind of some forces which have acted to take the cuisine from here to here, which was seen to be true in the case of Western cuisine to be positive food pairing. They are more and more shared, right? The ingredient pairs are similar to each other. Now, we had to collect the data to be able to answer this question of food pairing about the flavor molecules, right? So we actually made an assumption that the reason why a given ingredient or a pair of ingredients are used in a recipe could be multifold. There are many aspects to it, but of them, the most important factor are what could be characterized as called as olfactory mechanisms and gustatory mechanisms. The way we smell them and the way we taste them, beyond their shape, texture, etc., are the one which are predominant major factors which are contributing towards the flavor. Alright, so that's the assumption that we made, and we collected all sorts of molecules that are present in these ingredients. So these are the 194 unique ingredients. By that, I mean that we took ingredients and we did not distinguish between a chopped potato and a sliced potato. Both are equivalent because that should not necessarily change the flavor profile. I know that we are ignoring very, very interesting things here, which is that of process of cooking, whether it is boiled, fried, etc. But in this simplified study, which was done similar to that done on the Western cuisines, we are right now ignoring that fact, because this information about what happens when you were to cook or boil a food is not easily available in terms of the molecular composition, how it changes. So we are just sticking to the basic ingredients and the molecules which are characterized from these ingredients and reported through various chemistry journals as well as other journals. So we collected it through available resources as well as from the literature for the Indian cuisine and its ingredients belonging to different categories, and we had around 1200 flavor molecules, unique flavor molecules, which are present across all these ingredients, right? Now, starting with the data of recipes, ingredients, and their flavor molecules, now we are left with the question, how do you measure pairing? So, what I'm showing you here is the Indian cuisine, let us say, starting from recipe number 1, 2, all the way up to the last one, 2543. Let me take one caricature example of a recipe, that of coconut chutney made in a very simplified manner, having only 4 ingredients, let us say. Okay, I'm taking some key ingredients which I believe are definitely part of the coconut chutney. Now, knowing the definition of pairing, all we do is that a given recipe will be broken into its constituent ingredients, and further all possible pairs will be made. So given this recipe having only 4 ingredients, NC2 pairs, 6 possible pairs could be made, and for every pair, let us say this onion and coconut, the way it is done here, you measure how many molecules are common between the two, shared between the two. Turns out that they do have a lot of sharing. They are all molecules coming from plants, and plant pathways are often common because of the evolutionary processes by which these plants have evolved. So there are commonalities between these. and you do find that there is an amount of sharing here in terms of flavor molecule sharing. So this number obtained is called NS, number of shared molecules, and for a given recipe, by simply averaging across all pairs, you find out NSR, the number of shared molecules in a given recipe. Okay? Having done that, you can actually take this number and average it across all the recipes to find out the number of molecules which are on an average pair across the recipes of a given cuisine, right? So that's how we ended up quantifying this information, starting from the recipes, ingredients, molecules, to find out the food pairing. So what does the Indian cuisine tell us? Turns out, for our surprise, we were expecting actually a universal law which might have been encoded by the intuition of a chef called Blumenthal, and what we found out is that actually that's not true. Very, very interestingly, we found that the Indian cuisine, compared to that of a random level bar that you have here, instead of having uniform pairing, having similar type of ingredients which are similar in terms of their taste and flavor molecules, they tend to have diversity of ingredients brought together in a given recipe. Well, that's an interesting observation, though not very uncommonsensical for chefs. So when we present this work to the chefs, turns out that they say, we knew about it, that Indian cuisine has got this diversity of ingredients, and that's a characteristic feature of Indian cuisine. But for the first time, thank you, you guys are telling us in a manner which is quantifiable and also comparable to the other world cuisines, right? So this way we ended up coming up with an observation which turned out to be a discovery of what was earlier called as negative food pairing, positive versus negative, but for reasons which was imposed on, asked to us, saying that why do you want to use word negative? That's when we have coined a word which is uniform food pairing and contrasting food pairing. Contrast in terms of molecular contrast. Right. So that's a conclusion that we have come up with, that Indian cuisine in fact is characterized with contrasting food pairing, indicating more the extent of flavor sharing between a pair of ingredients, less will be their co-occurrence in recipes, right? So we have to figure this out by doing detailed investigation at the level of pairs of ingredients, the way they are used in recipes, as well as recipes in toto, as well as across regional cuisines. Notice that the data that was compiled was coming from various regional cuisines. It is quite possible that while one of these regional cuisines could have been having contrasting food pairing, many others could be having, it could be an averaging effect essentially. Others could have been of different type. So we had to verify this. So what we did is that we looked at pairs having food pairing changing from very small value to high value, and you figure out that the frequency of use of these pairs together in a recipe across the cuisine as expected goes down, indicating the contrast, indicating the decreased use with increasing similarity, flavor similarity, right? So that was the first observation at the level of ingredient pair. Going forward, we did more detailed investigations to find out the food pairing at the level of different recipe sizes. So what is shown on the x-axis is the recipes having size 2 or more than 2, meaning all of them, by the way, right? Because food pairing is not defined for recipes which are having only one ingredient, right? So all recipes having size 4 or more than 4. As you keep doing this, you figure out that the data which is shown here is that of the randomized cuisine is shown here, and the real cuisine for which the computation was done is shown here in the filled blue dots. Quite clearly, there is a contrast there on the negative side, right, as I showed you in the previous slide. And further to that, we ask this question: what makes this possible? What's the reason that we tend to have the contrasting food pairing in the Indian cuisine compared to that of the Western cuisines? There were multiple hypotheses, because when you look at the ingredient usage, as common sense might tell us that indeed some ingredients are used more frequently, right? A typical Pareto's law, Zipf's law, you must have heard about sometimes, the way you use words, the way the wealth is distributed, etc. Right? So we find that there is a similar pattern here, because quite clearly there would be only few ingredients probably which are available across the year. Probably there are few ingredients which are cheaper to use, etc. And some of them might have actually got logged into the rubric of the culture. Thereby they become the characteristic feature of that particular regional cuisine. Because of that, ingredient use is one pattern. The other thing that we said is that maybe the recipes have got a mold. So let us say a kheer has got a mold of having a base ingredient, a milk, sugar and some other components. right? Similarly, a vegetable might have a mold of this sort wherein different categories of ingredients can be filled in. So we did these experiments to create what are randomized control of preserving ingredient frequency or ingredient category to find out what might possibly explain this phenomena, and we found out that the only pattern which actually can explain this is that of the frequency of use of ingredients. So the way we have ended up using ingredients with a certain frequency, the one which are more popular, some of them being less popular, turns out is possibly responsible for the way we are finding in the case of Indian cuisine. Now, what is the reason for that? We have not fully understood, but at least we know that that's a factor which is deciding here, the food pairing that as we found it. Now, as I said, we need to also see it across all the regional cuisines to convince ourselves that this is not an averaging effect. So this is the zero baseline, and what we find is that Indian cuisine indeed has the so-called negative food pairing compared to that of a randomized cuisine, and all other regional cuisines are also on the lower side, indicating that the contrasting food pairing is a common feature across all the regional cuisines that we studied, conditions applied, the limited data that we used, etc. Given that, we find that this is the pattern. Now there is one cuisine which seems to be slightly deviating from the pattern, and which cuisine is that? The Mughlai cuisine. So quite interestingly, that was kind of a supporting evidence for us that a cuisine which has been introduced to the Indian subcontinent rather later seems to be deviating from the pattern closer to the random, and probably it has got ingrained some of the characteristic features of the local geography, right? Okay, so that was, there were many other things that we did, but for the paucity of time I won't get into that, but to tell you that in fact we got this reinforced understanding that the Indian cuisine does have a very, very interesting characteristic feature which is different from that of the Western cuisine. So our job, we found that that was one of the interesting catchphrase that we used. Now, how do we go about trying to find out, are there characteristic features of each regional cuisine? I'm sure that many of you come from different geographies of India, Bengal, South India, Maharashtra, etc. And you would say definitely that the way ingredients are used together, or the one which is used more frequently, etc., are very different in my regional cuisine compared to the one which is nearby, right? So we wanted to find out, similar to finding the uniqueness of individuals through DNA fingerprinting, can we actually find out what could be now called as the culinary fingerprints of regional cuisines by looking at what kind of food pairing it is having, which I already answered to you, all of them are having contrasting food pairing. Secondly, by finding out which ingredient category, remember I told you those 15 categories that I showed you, vegetables, spices, dairy, etc. Which of this category is a major contributor, primary contributor, or what is the contribution that is coming from individual categories. So this looks like more like a synthesizer of ingredient categories, that some category is used heavily and some is used less, and their contribution is more towards negative food pairing, lesser, more, and comparatively you can make these comparisons. You figure out that even within this limited data, you do find very unique pattern in which ingredient categories are represented. Not only that, but they are contributing towards a new scale that we are presenting, a new barometer, molecular level barometer called food pairing that is measurable, right, from the data that is available, right? So we find that very interesting patterns are coming from here, from culinary fingerprints. Now some of you coming from data sciences and pattern learning, etc., might be thinking that how can I use this, right? Think about it, that could it be possible for us to use it in some way? I'll come to that in a while later. Going forward, we did one more interesting study to find out the so-called whatever negative food pairing that we are getting. We know that the ingredient frequency is important, but what is the relevance, importance of a given ingredient category in the food pairing pattern? That's what we wanted to figure out. For that, we did an interesting study. We took all the recipes, and if you wanted to figure out the importance of, let us say, remember that all these 16 baskets are sitting in front of us, indicating that all vegetables which are ever used in the recipes are put here, the spinach and others. You have spices, you have dairy products, etc. Now what we did is that we did a randomization experiment. I call it a monkey in a kitchen experiment, wherein you have recipes, and let us say I want to find out what is the importance of vegetable category towards the negative food pairing. What I would do is that take all the recipes which are having a vegetable in it, any vegetable of the basket that I have, And in these recipes, I will randomize the vegetables. Instead of one vegetable, which I won't break the mold, but I will replace that particular vegetable randomly from the basket, right? If I do that experiment, turns out that I would have figured out possibly the relevance of that particular category in the whole cuisine, right? When you do this experiment, from the initial food pairing which is observed here in the blue line, you find that for the categories that are shown here, there is a small difference that is being made in terms of food pairing pattern, a small difference, marginal difference, but it is very close to the original cuisine, indicating that none of the categories which are shown here are important. They are not the fulcrum, right? If I were to replace it with one with other, it's fine for me. So there is no uniqueness about that particular ingredient, that particular vegetable which is used here of a given category, right? And this is important given the fact that in a given category, which are ingredient present in a given category, this is spice, this is vegetable, there is a lot of sharing of molecules. So it's commonsensical to think that probably if I were to replace with one ingredient with other, a lot of molecules would anyway be similar, and therefore the food pairing would not change much. That's how it seems what we are getting here. But for one category, and that category is shown here now. It shows that if you were to go through all the recipes which are having spice in it, and were to randomize the spice, instead of claw you would put some of the spice from the basket that you have, turns out that the food pairing would be disturbed. Thereby, it indicates that spice is the molecular fulcrum in terms of food pairing pattern of the Indian recipes. Again, the chefs will come and tell us that, gentlemen, thank you, we knew that. But again, thanks for telling us, because you're doing it in a very more scientific and quantitative manner. Alright? So we found out the relevance of each spice individually, not as a category, and figured out which are the spices which are contributing towards the negative food pairing and the one which are all ingredients which are contributing towards the positive food pairing. Majority of them happen to be spices in the top 10, barring tomato. The top 10 are shown here. Okay, so what we figure out is that the various spices and their combinations which are used, one of them is here, the masala as we call them, they seem to be the fulcrum. They are the ones who are deciding what we measured as contrasting food pairing, which is coming out as a characteristic feature of the Indian cuisine. So we declared, to steal the logo from Amul, that spice is the taste of India, and in a quantifiable manner, right? And well, again, you would be thinking, how do I use this information, knowledge that I've gathered by asking a very simple question? Why do I eat what I eat in my mess or in my home? And how come I end up mixing the ingredients, composing the ingredients the way I do? Very simple questions, right? But asking for the first time ended up making us discoverers of something very, very interesting, reaching up to a spice which seems to have a long trade history all the way up to East India Company and farther than that, right? Very interesting historical angle too. So science need not necessarily be devoid of other aspects of history, geography, culture, climate, etc. See? Okay. This particular research, where we showed a very unique pattern of pairing in the case of Indian cuisine, very, very distinct from that of the Western cuisine, was touted as the emerging technology by the MIT Technology Review, and at the end of the year it was declared as Best of 2015. And this is the picture which was depicted. It's a network picture indicating how ingredients are sharing molecules with each other. It's a simplified version, I must tell you, and showing the importance of individual recipes in terms of their contribution towards the negative food pairing. Okay, now the next part, applications. How do you go forward to use this towards something beneficial, something useful, something interesting for that matter? Well, that's when we are moving into certain directions which I will tell you quickly. This allows us a diversity of applications to be thought about based on the simple observation made. And to go further, I would say that not necessarily based on food pairing, but in general to look at food from the data perspective, from the information perspective, can tell us what are the various questions that you can ask based on this. Okay, so starting from what we have figured out to be the molecular essence, seems like, think about it, we have around 200 ingredients in Indian recipes, and turns out that a typical recipe is made up of 7 ingredients, let's say. Okay, the numbers are not so important. So the number of total recipes that you can actually create by all kind of permutation and combination is astronomical. In fact, when you calculate it, it comes out to be close to the number of galaxies which have been estimated to be present in the universe. How many recipes do we have in our traditional cuisines? Turns out that the number is not too large. it would be maximally of the order of few 10,000s, not more than that, if you take out the duplicate recipes or very common recipes. Given that, question is, are all these recipes that are possible, are feasible, are they palatable, is the question that we are asking. And now that is what we are saying, instead of simply making permutations and combinations, how about using the food pairing pattern that has been figured out in the North American, Latin American, Indian cuisine, go further, figure out the culinary fingerprints that we have figured out. Based on that, can you go closer to a regional cuisine and predict recipes which are similar in terms of food pairing, notice that, and say that probably these will be palatable. These are the ones which are following the pattern that we have observed. So probably these will be more receptive. That's a prediction we are making. Although notice that there is a catch here. That is that we have measured only food pairing. We have not shown the fact that the taste as we perceive from the recipes is indeed coming because of the food pairing. That has not been shown. Further, you can also ask, what are the implications for the health? Could it be so that having a certain kind of pairing or certain combination of molecules is actually better for health, or better to avoid certain kind of lifestyle disorders that we discussed in the beginning? Could it be obesity or diabetes or cardiovascular disorders? Well, that's the question we should be asking now. So, novel recipe generation, knowing the pattern, is one interesting thing. This is where we have come up with a very simple app called Flavidoscope, similar to a kaleidoscope which mixes colors. Flavidoscope mixes flavors with the pattern that we have discovered, trying to create novel recipes. Okay, it's far away from the expectations. We are trying it out with some chefs and amateur people, cooks, who can give us some feedback and bring back saying that this is not working and you should be modifying this, etc. Remember, food is a subjective experience, so that makes our life more tough, but we are still trying to crack this problem, right? Food formulations, new food formulations. Can you make new toffees? Can you make new beverages which are probably different from what they were earlier by mixing them in a certain manner? Can we pair them? Have you heard about wine pairing? With a certain recipe, the wine is paired. This one goes with that. And this is a cultural information coming from people who have experienced it, tried it, and connoisseurs of food and wine. But can the pattern be identified from from the observed data, and can we come up with rules for that? And not why only wine pairing? Why not some other beverages pairing? Can we do that? Right? Hypothesis generation and testing. All of a sudden we'll come up with, we have lots of hypotheses that are logged into our traditional knowledge, where certain kind of ingredients can go together, cannot go together. Now, what is the guarantee that all of it is evidence-based? That all of it is time-tested? No, we have no idea of that so far. So we could actually propose certain hypotheses that are coming from traditional knowledge, including that which is thought to be from Ayurveda, and think of testing them to figure out which one of them actually makes sense from the health perspective. Right? That's what we can come at. And going towards the level of molecules. Notice, because the food that we consume eventually through the process of metabolism reaches all the way up to our cells and genes, and it interacts with our genes, and thereby is actually leading to many things, including aging and some of the disorders, apart from nourishing us and helping us grow. Right? So can we find out those food disease association and find out connection between the nutrition and the genomics? These are various open questions. Towards creating a large number of recipes, as I told you, we have come up with an app, and this is where we have the possibility of creating recipes and trying to make them go in the direction of health. Can we make them such that they would be actually healthier? The simplest way to do that would be in a very, very special case. Take a case of, let us say, diabetes, wherein certain kind of ingredients are disallowed. They are not meant to be used by the known understanding from nutrition, in which case, can we create recipes which are not having that ingredient as a replacement of the same, but at the same time has similar taste based on food pairing? Can we come up with that? And other variations. Well, that's the simplest way of thinking about it. Can we take it to a different dimension altogether? Well, we have not done this, so I'll be presenting very briefly data coming from one of the papers which tells us about a very interesting aspect. Notice that there have been facts all the way that eat fat, should be eating fat, should not be eating fat, should be eating carbohydrates, should not be eating carbohydrates, and many such advices are given. Most of these advices are generic advices, right? Nobody tells you that, hello, Dr. So-and-so, you must not be eating this. So these are generic advices, and many of them have been controversial. What works and what doesn't work, and because of that, the guidelines which are given by various organizations across the world keep changing and keep creating confusion across the world. So can we go in a direction where finding scientific ways for altering diet to improve health, A. B. More than making it generic, can we make it personalized? Can we make it specific to an individual? Now this is where I'll be talking about some work that has been done to make it more individual. Specifically I'll be referring to diabetes, which talks about increased levels of glucose in the blood, and a simple measure which is used, the postprandial glycemic response, which tells us after we consume food, what is the level of increase of sugar in our body, which can be measured through simple instruments that are available to us. Now in this particular study, a large number of subjects were measured for the postprandial glycemic response, PPGR, and that is where the data, large amount of data was collected, which is related to diabetes as well as increase in the glucose level in the blood after consuming the food. Now that involves the data coming from the food, what food you are eating, as well as the body mass index and other measures that were taken. Question is that were asked about the activity, which was measured through the cell phone recorded entries, blood tests that were done, as well as the gut microbiome. You know, the microbiome that sits on our guts and is known to be responsible for various disorders by now. All these measurements were taken and fed into a machine learning algorithm, okay, to make predictions about what is the rise. Remember, because they were all plugged in with a major instrument which will continuously measure the rise in glucose, and therefore you have a data, and they were given some standardized meals, specific meals that were dictated in the morning, after lunch, and the dinner was left to them, and all other measurements were done. These were done for 800 people, and based on that the training was done to predict what is the level of increase in the glucose after eating a certain kind of a food based on this cohort of 800 people. Now, the interesting thing is that after taking this data, it could be taken to a next level where first observation that was done here is that after taking a huge amount of data, that it is not as if every individual responds in a similar manner. The way the PPGR changes in individual, if all of us were to eat banana, would that actually lead to, after 2 hours, would that lead to similar increase in the blood level? The question was no, not at all. There is a huge amount of variability. Therefore, giving generic dietary suggestions is dicey. Well, that is where we need to go into towards personalized thing. What they did is to start from food, how the PPGRs are measured, and further using machine learning algorithms, they made certain predictions which were used. So the beauty of this experiment is that after making measurements and validating with 100 participants, so further, those subjects for which no data of PPGR was actually measured, used for the purpose of learning, for them the same input factors were taken and predictions were made about what is the expected level of PPGR for this individual given a certain food, and the accuracy was fairly good. And not only that, to go one level apart, what they did is that to take a small cohort of 26 participants in which they fed them certain standardized meal based on what is the expected level of PPGR. So if you know that they do have higher value of PPGR, that is the increase in glucose level is high, how do we intervene? How do you control that? Based on the prediction made from the machine learning. They made predictions, and accordingly from the standardized meals that were available, they provided them the one which the machine learning algorithm will predict to be the one which is suitable to decrease the PPGR. And by doing that, they actually found out what is the accuracy. So at the end of it, what they found is that the prediction is accurate, I'll tell you the accuracy, and superior to the common practice, I'll tell you what is that. And short-term personalized dietary interventions, short-term because this was done obviously for very limited period of time, it could actually successfully lower the post-meal glucose, the PPGR, it could actually bring it down. Now that's a very, very interesting study published in Cell approximately a year back, indicating that probably the use of data, machine learning, and questions which are asked based on known understanding about what is responsible, like which food is possibly responsible for a certain indicator, could take us into a direction where we could really make empirically evidence-based scientific diets which are good for me in terms of not increasing my weight and becoming obese for that matter, or to develop cardiovascular disorders or diabetes. And again, we are still talking about preventing the disease as well as trying to mitigate the complications of the disease by using certain diet. Okay, that's the level where we are. So the standard measures which are used is carbohydrate based prediction, that look at how much carbohydrate you are using. So that's what is shown here. Or calories, which all of you heard about. How many calories do you consume, and what is the correlation with the increase in PPGR? Turns out that the correlation is very low for both of these standard measures, whereas when you use the machine learning algorithm here for the cohort prediction that was done, mini cohort prediction that was done, you find that the correlation is much higher, indicating that compared to the standardized measure which are so far advised, the measure which is provided or the technique that is provided through the machine learning is much better. Not only that, for the cohort for which they did intervention by giving individual recommended meals, they found out that again the correlation is much better. Now this is one of the earliest studies that has been ever done to use data from large number of subjects and also use machine learning algorithms for making predictions to come up with personalized dietary recommendations. So it's a long shot. But the idea for me was to present you with the studies which are being done and the direction that we are taking. We could not have imagined maybe 20 years or 30 years back that predictions made by meteorology departments will actually come true. But thanks to various things that have happened, including mathematical models and the data available, we are at a stage where indeed the predictions made by meteorological departments for short term are workable and valid. In a similar manner, can we think of a world wherein, as opposed to being blind about how the food is treating us in terms of various features which are responsible for the disorders that we worry about, and we have been spending billions of dollars, if not trillions, to cure them, can we find ways by which change our diet so that we can be healthier, right? I started my career as my training as a physicist. I wanted to be an astronomer. It was a long journey from looking at working on astronomy to all the way up to gastronomy. This is the quote that I had read in a place called IUCAA, Jayant Narlikar famous center, Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, very humbly put by these astronomers in their canteen, saying that the discovery of a new dish confers more happiness on humanity than the discovery of a new star. Well, I have not been able to discover a new star by being an astronomer, but hopefully I'll be in a place where I'll be able to come up with new dishes which are not only tastier but healthier. Well, that's the idea. And I would like to acknowledge a lot of students who have contributed towards work that is done in the lab. Specifically for the food projects, Rakhi and Anupam have contributed from IIT Jodhpur. And right now we are working on some extension projects where students, MTech CV students, Arvind, Ayushi and Shubhra are contributing towards some of the work that we are doing here. So I would like to thank all of them, because of which this work was possible. I hope by presenting the work that we have done and some of the discoveries that we have made, and something which is happening elsewhere, but that is a new direction where not only people who are working in food, but people who are working in computation, data science, machine learning would get excited about. I hope that was the inspiration that I wanted to pass on to you, which is what I'm excited about. So thank you. Thanks a lot. So I'm available if you have any questions now. No questions or queries? Alright. So I'll be anyway available to you if you may want to discuss anything. So thank you. Thanks a lot.
Can I make a statement of
Sure.
expectation? I'm waiting for a restaurant you'll be opening soon.
I've already thought a name for it. It's called Blend It Like Bagler. I'm no kidding. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
There are few questions.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
It's well known that Indian food is very popular.
Mm-hmm.
And no offense, but we have heard that English food and French food are not that popular. So, Indian food is popular, Chinese food is very popular throughout the world. So, is there a similar pattern in Chinese food also?
Well, that's a good question. I guess it has actually, the work that we have done has called for a huge investigation that needs to be done, not only in terms of food pairing, but looking for other things. Because we are looking at only micronutrients or small molecules. We have to look at macronutrients also. But it calls for collection of traditional recipes and looking at patterns in those. To the best of my knowledge, so far, barring one Middle Eastern cuisine after our study, no other cuisine has been studied in a rigorous manner. I personally wish to study various Asian cuisines, including the Oriental cuisines, because I believe that there is a pattern in them. A similar pattern could be expected to be present in them. So how does it correlate with taste and their popularity is a big question, is not answered so far, and therefore I am very, very cautious about it, because various newspapers, when they reported our work, they said that scientists have figured out why Indian food is tasty. I mean, I was like, not really, because we have not found that out. We have just found one particular major called food pairing, on which our cuisine, the Indian cuisine, is distinct. How does it relate to taste? How does it relate to health? Is so far unknown. We don't have an answer to that. But it needs to be done. My guess would be that yes, many of these Oriental cuisines would have a similar pattern that of the Indian cuisine. Yeah.
For the personalized diet recommendations, I know next to nothing about the human body, but besides predicting PPGR, is there something else we should be looking at, some other dimension to human health for recommending health?
What kind of dimensions are you referring to, for example?
Like if, well, I wouldn't know what to give it as an example, but besides just mentioning, besides just trying to predict the PPGR after meals.
Okay, you're saying as an indicator of diabetes, instead of just measuring glucose level, can we measure other things also?
Not just as an indicator of diabetes, but as an indicator of overall health.
Yeah, true, that's right. Okay, now let's try to appreciate this. Notice that when we are looking for personalized recommendation and its effect on health, it's a complex problem. You're talking about a spectrum of things that the body is, I mean, whether I feel sleepy after eating food or not, starting from there to all the way up to how witty I am. So instead of getting into that, what this landmark study has done, in my opinion, is to take a very pinpointed problem in a complex avenue of questions that are there, knowing that diabetes has been classically and in a very universally accepted manner, has been measured in terms of the postprandial glucose level response, taken that specific question and answered that. Correct? You need to look at other disorders which we know are related to diet, such as obesity and cardiovascular disorders. Find other measures and look for ways of predicting them. Open question. And if you think people are not working on it, not really. Lot of work actually has started as a spin-off of such kind of work that have been happening, and I'm sure there is many interesting things that will be coming, not only in recommendation of a particular diet about what you should be eating or not eating, but specific interventions. For example, what kind of fermented food, like a cheese or something like Yakult, you should be consuming. In fact, it might come to a level where in terms of gut microbiome, to be able to populate your gut with a certain kind of microbe which are beneficial for your health, that could be possible. The kind of composition which is good for me may not be the same which is for you. Although there are some generic rules for that, so I might be able to predict that you should be eating, Yakult, your name, given to you, so that you can become better with that. So such kind of interventions also are expected to come from that, apart from the traditional food. Yeah.
So one question that you are tackling is in terms of the molecules. Right? So we have also discussed about that. For a given this one, how many molecules are there? For example, coconut, like how many molecules are contributing to its brain?
Yeah.
So do you actually, for each and every recipe that which you are looking into it, whatever you are adding it, each and individual things that which you are adding it, do you find out how many molecular components? See, coconut might be very, what to say that, like contains only 2 compounds. But for example, if you take something like basically a spice or something like that, then the number of molecular components might be more.
Yeah.
But the fraction of the molecular components might be very less. So what is the amount of molecular components if suppose you make a chutney?
Okay.
Example,
okay, I think there are 2 things that you're saying, if I were to take on from what you said. Okay, so if you look at the distribution, first of all, there is no bias the way you said that spices may end up having, here it is, having more molecules. So if you look at, this is the flavor profile size, that number of molecules reported from a given ingredient could be in the range of all the way up to 250. So some ingredients have size between up to 25, up to 50, 75, etc. When you break it down and look at across the categories, turns out that each of these bar is having all kind of representation from categories, indicating that first of all there is no bias in that. That's first thing. So there is no bias. But is the data limited? Yes, of course it is limited. So the number of flavor molecules that we are taking here is completely coming from literature and what is available. We have not done that. That was a very peculiar question that was asked by one of my students, or a friend, it was a friend, that how many of these 2543 recipes you cooked yourself? I said, hold on, none of them, but each of us do that, cook it every day, right? So the molecules that we are getting is from published literature, and that could be limited. That could be driven by some of the commercial ingredients, etc. Those taking into consideration those limitations, the data is as complete as possible from the resources available. That's first thing. Second, that's a valid question. That the quantity of the ingredient, where is it going? Apart from the fact that you're cooking it and therefore the molecular form might change. Yes, that's right. It's an unanswered question so far. So
the composition actually of this each ingredient,
true. True.
That can be actually a separate feature vector.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a valid point actually. We have not done that. For example, each ingredient has got certain potency. Example, 1 gram of potato is not the same of 1 gram of asafoetida, hing, right? Huge difference in terms of quantity. So you need to find out what is the potency, what is the effect it might have in the taste and the flavor, which is what is responsible for the final taste of the recipe. Taking that into consideration and the quantity which goes into a typical recipe, we need to re-quantify what we are calling as food pairing and do the similar analysis on that. That's true. So we have not done it so far, but it's obviously the next step to be done. True.
Like we did for diabetes, there's a lot of claim about dementia.
Okay.
And dementia control could also be food and food component related. One of the recent studies said that a dementia patient is fed virgin coconut oil every day, uncooked, a spoon of coconut oil, or just put coconut oil on the top, the response is better. Right? They tried quite a few Alzheimer's
Subjects.
Affected subjects. They started moving better.
Okay.
They have one test named the clock. You have to draw a circle and write like a clock. Most of the dementia and Alzheimer's patients could not draw a clock well.
Okay.
But after taking this coconut oil, they're able to do it.
Wonderful.
It's essentially how they're able to start and end at the same point. That's probably the idea. Is there any study done in terms of food pairing for these kind of things, dementia?
Not at all. As I told you, food pairing so far has not been clearly associated with either taste or the health so far. We have hypotheses. We have various hypotheses which need to be tested, but I am more hopeful not only about food pairing per se, but a study which I showed you towards the end, which was done by a laboratory in Israel and was published in Cell. Wonderful study done for the first time ever to tackle a specific problem of PPGR related to diabetes and how it could be related to a plethora of factors. I think it was 170 or 17 or so factors which could be responsible, and thereby trying to find out what is the prediction that you can make, A and B, making actually intervention. What they did is that actually they did diet-based intervention in the last cohort, the smallest cohort, and they looked at their the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome that was earlier and the gut microbiome that was later post-intervention, it had indeed changed to what is known to be healthier and better. That gives us a lot of confidence that such kind of studies, the data-driven as well as machine learning-based studies, by taking a lot of factors which are already known to be related to a given factor, would be more useful. So food pairing, I'm skeptical. How successful would it be as a health indicator? But yes, this can happen, and it's going to happen. That's a prediction that I would like to make at my cost. Yeah.
Okay. Another question is that, like, what you smell, it might be there won't be any smell, but when you taste it, there is a taste. But if you add something to that, the taste will be entirely different.
Wonderful.
For example, one of the best example is gooseberry. It doesn't have any smell at all. You eat it, it doesn't taste all that good, but when you drink water, it is converted into sweetness.
Wonderful. That's right. Well,
That's one of the classic examples.
Good example. So you're essentially talking about synergy. That the molecule itself may not have sensory response
but
individually, but together in connection, when mixed with something else, it might give response. Again, untested territory. We have not studied it so far, and it is worth studying. Could it be so that despite the fact that individually the molecules are not reported to have sensory or strong sensory response, when put together, because of the way it has been used in the traditional recipes, seems to be creating wonderful response.
So why I brought this was that, like, you can take this particularly from this, what are the compounds that are present in the raw gooseberry, you may get these phytochemicals. But you do not exactly know that, like, how these individual compounds are reacting with some other compounds, and that way there is a possibility that it might be creating a new chemical compound.
Quite possible. That's
so
right.
Those are the things that which might be changing your flavor or something like that.
True.
But not as such an individual compound that which you are looking at. It may be actually.
You are right. You are right. In a big way, it is alchemy. That it's not simple. that put this and that and it comes out. But from the data we might get some indicators that putting which two ingredients might create that magic flavor which is my mother's taste or something of that sort. Yes, that is worth tasting. That's a synergy part.
You look into the interaction of this.
True. It's worth saying, but the trouble here is that it's a pioneering kind of work that we have done so far. Nobody had studied this so far, and the data is not available. Look at the cooked food. Where is the data available? Not available. So one will have to actually take up a big job. I mean, one has to convince somebody like a government saying that look, this is the project. If when done, can actually lead to magical interventions the way we are talking about here, leading to increase in productivity. Right?
Another point is given you know that these are the compositions. Is it by molecular dynamic simulation, is it possible to see that whether these two molecules are interacting and changing basically some of these?
True.
These are the
That's right. We are thinking about it. In silico studies that can be done where we are thinking about it. Could it be possible for us to figure out how do they interact in silico, thereby making a prediction about what might be happening in reality? True.
An enzyme.
True. Absolutely. Interaction. Yeah. Okay. So thanks a lot again. Yeah. Thanks for being there.
Yes,